Hiya, I'm Stacey. Welcome back to my channel. This is Vintage Stacey. And today, well, I think this is going to be a bit of a put together video because it was meant to be a reading vlog. And that kind of didn't happen in the end. Life has been a bit weird lately. Can't get comfy. So yeah, it's going to be slightly put together with some clips from other times. But yeah, it's a recent reading update is what I'm ramblingly trying to get round to. So first up, I was looking for, this was a happy accident really, I was looking for graphic novels with disability representation. In fairness, it's quite easy to find disability rep in graphic novels if you're comfortable looking in the superhero genre, because you can't swing tights and a cape without hitting a superhero that's got some sort of disability in their origin story, or as part of their superpower, there's a trade-off that they're really good at one thing and they're not so good at something else, and it's quite a common device. But I was looking for more day-to-day general life representation in graphic novels. And I had a read around and I found a Reddit thread that somebody else had posted asking basically the same thing. And this was recommended. And I kind of, without doing an awful lot of research on my own, just kind of auto bought it, just, click and thank you very much. And I'm quite glad that I didn't, because I don't think I'd have bought it if I'd have read about what it was, because when it turned up, it's YA historical fiction. It's not a graphic novel at all. It's Degenerates by J. Albert Mann. And yeah, it's just YA fiction. So I wouldn't have bought it because that's not what I was looking for. But I'm really glad I did, because the premise really interested me. And when it arrived, I was like, oh, that's not what I was after. And I ummed and ahed about returning it. But then I thought, no, I genuinely was really interested in the premise. So we're following 4 teenage girls. This is set, when is this set? I can't remember the time period. It's the early 1900s. But I can't remember when. Nope, it's gone, can't find it. It's not written down anywhere easily, what have you. Early 1900s. And we are in the Massachusetts School for Idiotic and Feeble-Minded Youth, which gives you a rough idea of what we're in for. So this is an institution. It's attached to an adult institution for people who have something going on with them that has been deemed to make them degenerate or morally weak or inferior intellectually. And there's a variety of reasons why you might end up here. So we're following these 4 teenagers here. You've got London, Alice, Maxine, and Rose. London is here because she is 13, 14 years old and pregnant and unmarried. Alice has what we would today recognise as selective mutism and a club foot. And she was dropped off here by her brother and sister-in-law, who were her carers after her parents passed away, until her sister-in-law fell pregnant. And the neighbours started to ask questions about whether or not they were worried the baby would have similar afflictions to Alice. So they decided, rather than deal with the stigma, that they would drop her off at this institution to be looked after. We then have Maxine and Rose. Maxine, when the book starts, it's not very easy to tell why Maxine is here. Rose has what we would today identify as Down syndrome. And that sort of fits with, that's one of a number of reasons why somebody would be in this institution. It's not immediately apparent why Maxine is here. That comes later. But there's all sorts of representation here, not just from the main characters, but the other people that you meet in the institution. There are a variety of reasons why you could end up here. Any diagnosis that now would fall under the category of special education needs, neurodiversity, any kind of learning or intellectual disability would be enough to land you in a place like this. And a multitude of physical disabilities could also land you here, as well as things that people deem to be moral weaknesses, which are taken as indications of intellectual inferiority. So London's unplanned teen pregnancy, and there's also representation of people being here due to queer identities. This is their story. It's their story of how they cope in the institution. It's their story of how they build bonds in order to protect each other and themselves and stay sane and stay hopeful in a place that's kind of designed to stamp out their hope. The idea is that once you arrive at a place like this, you will remain there. You'll eventually move on to the adult facility, but you will always be in a facility like this because you're deemed not to have value to society as a whole. And it's about how they all have dreams of being able to leave and live their own lives and have a future beyond this place where they are not treated particularly humanely. It's not pleasant. I put some trigger warnings on this one. If you've got any issues around, it's difficult to spoil, but not everything that I'm going to list happens to the 4 characters here. You see other characters going through different things. So if you've got any issues with pregnancy loss, if you've got any issues with teen pregnancy, if you've got any issues with infant mortality, and if you are sensitive to language which has historically been used to describe marginalised groups and which now would not be acceptable terms, then you may find this a little on the nose. However, for that exact reason, I would recommend it. I would particularly recommend it if you have a young person in your life who is waiting on, undergoing, or coming to terms with a diagnosis of, I think, any disability, but specifically SEN or neurodiverse related disabilities. I would recommend this because there's an awful lot of narrative, which I don't think is necessarily a new thing, but it's been amplified lately around, oh, there was never any of this, insert perfectly valid medical diagnosis here in my day. And this is a really good example of how, yes, there absolutely was all of these things then. We just didn't call it that. And anyone who was dealing with it was quite frequently, if they weren't fortunate enough to have family and a support network and resources around them, was quite swiftly shuffled out of view and kept somewhere where they were not going to inconvenience or upset or generally unsettle everybody else. And this is kind of a really good reminder that none of these conditions or diagnoses or terms that we're using now are new. We might be using language that we didn't use previously, but these people always existed. These communities were always out there. And people in these communities have frequently felt incredibly isolated, as though they're the only ones, because of erasure, because of the way in which these sorts of things allowed those conditions to be swept to one side. Next step. It was a weird one for me. So I have another video coming in a week or two that will explain that. I don't know when that's scheduled to go up, but yeah, so it's been a strange month and that's really impacted my reading. And in order to kind of still have books and reading to kind of escape to while I was trying to process everything else that was going on, I decided to sort of have a look at some of the challenges that were going on, because I find reading challenges can be really useful for kind of taking the decision making out of what you're going to read. So I decided, there's loads of reading challenges in March, so I was spoilt for choice, but I decided to have a crack at March on the Rails, which basically involves reading about trains. Anything to do with trains kind of fits for March on the Rails. So I picked up 2 in the end. One was a massive success, one was less so of a success. So the first one I picked up was already on my shelf and I hadn't read it yet. It's called Train. It's by Danny and Cohen. This one is, this is historical fiction. And again, I think this suffered from me not having done enough research about it beforehand. I don't always like to know a huge amount about books before I read them. So on the one hand, this is my fault, but on the other hand, not entirely. So this is set 1934. We're in Berlin and we are in the days or weeks running up to the ghettos being cleared. And we're following 6 teenagers in that period. A number of them are from communities that are likely to be targeted in the clearances and in the roundups. So we've got one of our characters is Roma. One of our characters is Jewish. We've got queer couples. We have all sorts of different, I'm not going to spoil too much, but there's different communities being represented here that know that they are likely to be on the shit list, makes it sound a bit what have you, but that they are going to be targeted in the coming weeks, and that once that starts, it's going to be too late, and that once they are shipped off, there's probably no coming back. So they have decided to escape. They've decided to run for it, and they're going to leave Berlin before the roundups start. Without exception, that involves leaving behind family and loved ones, and kind of they've got to procure forged papers. They have to come up with money. They have to do the things that they need to do to prep for going on the run. And they have to do that without alerting their families, because it puts their families in danger if they know something's happening. And also there's a chance that, certainly for some of them, that their families will try and dissuade them from going. Again, we swap POVs with this. Different chapters follow different characters. I really wanted to enjoy this. My interest in World War II, I talked about that previously. And I was, especially after having such a good time with Degenerates, I was really excited about the idea of reading something that looked at underrepresented communities' experiences during World War II. So specifically queer communities and Roma. So I was really looking forward to this. The slight issue that I had with this is that I think the best way to describe it is it's overwritten. Even within the first chapter or so, you feel as though you've been beaten over the head with the train metaphor. I think I literally said out loud, I get it. Because I felt like it was being done so hard. You know when you go around a museum, this is niche, but you know when you go around a museum, if you do the organised tour, like either the headphones or somebody's taking you around, and the guide will stop you at certain exhibits and point them out to you and draw your attention to it and talk to you in detail about this thing, and then sort of waft you past other things that are less relevant or less related to the theme of the tour that they're taking you on. That's kind of what I felt like through this. The author's hand is present throughout, on your shoulder, kind of guiding you over here. Look at this. Don't worry about that too much. It's not important. I've got to put this in because it fills in the details, but don't worry about it. You don't need to know. Back to this because this is really important. We're going to stand here for a little while and we're really going to make sure that you've understood this before we move on to the next thing. And I felt overseen. I felt watched the whole time I was reading this. I know it sounds silly, but I did. I felt like somebody was watching me to make sure that I was paying attention to the bits that were important. When I get to the back, there is some really interesting historical background information, some referencing information, some further reading, and an author's note. The author's note makes it very clear that Danny M. Cohen is an educator. He works in education, and he's got a very strong personal interest in increasing awareness about different communities during the Holocaust and the Holocaust experience. Holocaust survivors. He has a family member who's a Holocaust survivor. It's clearly a story that's really close to his heart, and that he feels raising awareness is incredibly important. And I thoroughly agree and support that. But having got to the end and read it all, I'm absolutely convinced that this book was written with a view to it being on a reading list, a required reading list for study, rather than for entertainment as literature, or even for education as sort of independent education as literature. This is clearly designed to be on a reading list for students who are undergoing a curriculum and who will be discussing it and who will be asked to reflect and probably write things about what they've read. And that kind of made sense for how I'd felt throughout it, that I was being very strongly drawn to these things rather than letting the story kind of carry you through. And the historical side of it was, at no point did I believe or feel as though I was in 1934 Berlin. I never felt like I was there. I felt thoroughly as though I was being taught about 1934 Berlin and what it was like to be there. And so, yeah, so from an educational point of view, if you're studying the Second World War for any kind of organised what have you, I'd recommend this. as something that you could use for some sort of comparative contextual work. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as a piece of fiction to enjoy. Yeah. So the next thing that I read, again, part of March on the Rails, was, I'm going to get this author's name wrong. I'm going to check. I'm still going to get it wrong, but I'm going to check anyway. Seicho Matsumoto, and I read Tokyo Express. I've heard of this author before. I'm not going to try and say the name again because I'm just going to offend someone. I've heard this author before. They've got a kind of reputation for really strong detective fiction. This is translated by, I can't remember who the translation was by. I'll put the name in. I really enjoyed this. It's short and snappy, but I really enjoyed the mystery in this. I rattled through this. I really wanted to see how this was going to turn out. There are some weird bits in it, but you have to kind of remember that it was written in 1950. I want to say 3, but it might be 4. I'm not remembering an awful because I don't have the physical. I read this on my Kindle, and I don't have any physical prompts to kind of remind me of things about it. So I'm just doing it off the top of my head. I should have made notes. But yeah, it's from the early 50s. It's translated from the Japanese. There are parts of this that are a little bit minutiae obsessed. There's a lot about train timetables. Train timetables are a really big factor in this. And when things arrive and leave and how long they're at different stations for and which stations they call at and how they intersect with other trains that are coming and going is a really big part of this. And that on occasion got a little bit repetitive. Because I think in order to sort of keep you clear on which train they're talking about at which time, it had to keep summarising which part of the timetable they were talking about. That got a little bit repetitive. But the mystery itself I was really interested in. The basic premise is that 2 people are seen boarding a train in Tokyo. A week later, their bodies are found on a beach quite some distance away. Initially, it's thought to be a double suicide, but one detective who's overseeing the situation has suspicions that it's not what it looks like. It's an interesting one because you start with one detective and he kind of has his initial suspicions that all is not as it seems, and he sort of starts to make some basic inquiries. And then after a couple of chapters, he hands the investigation over to someone else. And that turns out to actually be the main detective that you're following through the rest of the story. And he works for like a central agency that is, in the first instance, investigating corruption, government corruption. But part of his remit is to look into this crime because one of the 2 people who were found on the beach is a government employee who was thought to know quite a lot about a big fraud that was about to be uncovered, or big corruption network that was about to be uncovered. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. There are some dated points too. There's some times when they say things, particularly about women, there are some times where you sort of think that's yikes. But you, like say, if you keep in mind that you are talking about the early 50s when this was written, and different cultures as well. I don't know what Japanese gender roles are like. Different cultures have different things, and I can't always assume that my experience will be the same. So there were certain things where they sort of made reference to food and eating. There's one point where they say women love to eat. Women love to eat. Is that more than men, or just generally? Or there was some odd bit, not enough to take you out of the story, not enough to make you not want to read it, but just enough to make you sort of go, especially if there were a couple of times where they made pretty big leaps in the conclusions that they were drawing with the evidence based on how they thought women behaved, which was fun. Like I said, again, it wasn't enough to pull you out of the story. It was just enough to sort of make you get really, and then carry on. But I really wanted to see what happened with this, and I really enjoyed it. And I will read more of his. I've sort of got a couple more on the Kindle sort of lined up for another time, because I thought this was really clever, especially with how much it got into such a small word count. So yeah, I recommend this one. I really enjoyed it. And for the March on the Rails, I don't think it could have got more train related. Everything is either happening on a train or talking about trains or relying entirely on train timetables in order to work. So yeah, I really enjoyed that one. So I'm going to pop in a couple of clips that I filmed when I was up in Edinburgh that had originally been intended to be part of a bigger reading vlog, but that didn't come together because events overtook me. It doesn't really fit here, but it's just kind of wrapping up what I've read since I last wrapped up what I read, if that makes sense. So I'm going to put them in here because I did really enjoy the two books that I'm going to talk about. Yeah, I'll see you in a minute. Holding this, it feels really weird. Just popping on quickly because I'm exhausted. I should have put some B-roll in showing my trip. I'm currently in Leith in Edinburgh. I'm staying on the Ocean Mist this evening. Lovely. Really, really lovely. It's so well done. And the bed is huge and really comfy. And I'm desperate to get in it because I'm absolutely knackered. I went for dinner literally opposite the boat is a restaurant called Ship on the Shore. And I went and I ate too much food. There's no ifs, buts, or coconuts about it. And if there'd been coconuts, I'd probably eaten them too. I had too much food. I have regrets. I don't really. It was great, but you know what I mean. Anyway, I wanted to jump on and as part of my, because I'm doing my reading wrap up, I probably won't do it all in one go. I'll probably do it in bits. But I wanted to talk to you about This Is How You Lose the Time War. Really good. I don't read a huge amount of sci-fi. I find it too complex. My brain doesn't work that way. So I don't tend to. I do read some, but not loads. It's not a genre that I reach for very often. But I'm really glad that I picked this up. It's done in the form of letters between two characters, Red and Blue. They are droids, humanoids, robots. I can't remember. But they're not human, as we would understand the term. They are fighting in kind of cross-galaxy war. And the two factions that they represent, one represents or sort of stands for technology and innovation and progress and automation and sort of a futuristic view of where things should be heading. The other side is more focused on nature and evolutionary kind of techniques to kind of just get where we're going and to kind of preserve things as they are. And those two factions are at war about how life should proceed. And Red and Blue are sent out by their opposing sides to fight. They are exceptionally powerful, exceptionally strong, and they are able on their own to take out entire armies of humans, which is why they're sent out on their own. But because they're sent out on their own, they're programmed with a certain level of autonomy and independent thought because they're not necessarily following specific orders in the battlefield. If something goes on, they can change and they can make their own decisions as to what they're going to do. But with that independent thought also comes the ability to question the people who've sent them out to do the things that they're doing. Over time, they develop, it starts as an antagonistic relationship through letters and notes and hints and clues that they leave each other to sort of taunt and wind each other up when they're chasing each other. But over time, what you see developing is a really cute, queer, enemies to lovers romance. Super slow burn, but really nicely done. The two authors who wrote this, I can't remember the names. The two authors who wrote this had agreed before they started writing on a basic premise. They took a character each and they wrote this by writing letters to each other. So their responses are genuine. So they'd get one of the letters and then they'd write their response back. And that's how they compiled the letters to make up the book. So there is a genuine sense of immediacy to the responses. There's humor, there's teasing. It's really nicely done. I say queer, there is no specified gender for red or blue. They use she, her pronouns, but given that they're not human, they could be non-binary, they could have been programmed with female identities. It doesn't really specify, and I don't think it really matters. I think it just matters that they've been programmed with the same gender identity, whatever that is. So queer, I think, is where this would sit most comfortably. And it's really nicely done in terms of the slow burn on the romance. And you can kind of see a little bit of antagonism switching to flirting, and it's really nicely done. I won't spoil, but suffice to say that when you have two people who have developed feelings for each other, who are on opposing sides of a war, that throws up challenges. And it throws up problems when your superiors discover that you might have compromised loyalties. And then it raises the question for beings that have been programmed to follow orders and to do what they've been ordered to do. When they start to apply that independent thought and that autonomy to the things that they've been asked to do, what does that leave them with, and what can they do with that if they disagree? It's really nice. It's really short, and it's definitely my kind of sci-fi because it's character driven, and the romance is just as important, more important than the war or the world building. So yeah, would really recommend. Anyway, so tired. I'm going to go get in my comfies. I'm going to read for a bit. See you later. Hiya. It's a bit later in the evening. I've had a bit of a chill out time. I'm still exhausted, but I'm not feeling quite as like I've been hit by a food truck. I thought there's like this really cute bookshelf in my room, bookcase in my room with loads of books. There's a new telly, which I knew when I booked in, and it's absolutely fine by me. I thought it would be a shame not to read anything. I am only here for the one night, so I didn't want to start anything too substantial. So I had a look through it and I found this tiny little, teeny tiny short story. It's called Galatea. It's by Madeline Miller. Madeline Miller wrote Circe and is it The Song of Achilles? Yes, it is Song of Achilles. It's on the front from the author of A Song of Achilles. And this is really cute. It's like 50 pages, and they're small pages, so it's a really quick read. Galatea is a woman who she was carved in stone by her husband, who is a sculptor, carved her out of marble, and then as a gift from the goddess, she was brought to life for him. He's horrendous to her, awful, and she's kept basically prisoner, looked after by doctors and nurses after an escape attempt that failed. And this is about how she deals with that and how she responds to him. It's really short. I quite liked the style. I didn't read Circe or Song of Achilles. I remember hearing about them at the time when they came out, and I know there was quite a fuss around both of them, but I didn't read them. So having read this and quite enjoyed the writing style, I think I probably will keep an eye out for both of them, actually, if I see them, pick them up, give them a go. So yeah, this goes on like a last minute kind of squeezed into this month's reading wrap up. So there we go, that's my reading wrap up. I'm not going to say a monthly one or a particular period of time, because that spanned the start of the year really. Fab 4 February took over February, and I didn't get time to read anything else in that month. But January and March have kind of blurred a bit and didn't end up getting their own wrap-up. So this is kind of a general summary wrap-up. Anyway, I'm rambling now. I hope everyone's all right. Thank you very much for watching. I swear I will get my general ability to construct a thought pulled back together at some point, and we will move forward in a slightly more cohesive way. And I'll see you next time. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.